Hi, this is Randal Schwartz, host of FLOSS Weekly. This week, Dan Lynch joins me. We're going to be talking about open source software on mainframes. Imagine that. You're not going to want to miss this, so stay tuned. FLOSS Weekly is brought to you from LastPass Studios. Securing every access point in your company doesn't have to be a challenge. LastPass unifies access and authentication to make securing your employees simple and secure. Check out lastpass.com/twit to learn more.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is FLOSS Weekly with Randal Schwartz and Dan Lynch. Episode 564, recorded January 29th, 2020. Open Mainframe Update. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Melissa. Bad data happens to good companies. That's why 10,000 businesses count on Melissa for clean, reliable address data. Get started today with 25,000 records cleaned for free. That's a $75 value at melissa.com/twit. It's time for FLOSS Weekly, the show about free, libre, open source software. I am your host, Randal Schwartz, Merlin at Stonehenge.com, bringing you each week the movers, the shakers, the big projects, little projects, projects you may be using every day, projects you might want to download right after this show and play with. That's kind of hard for today's project, but we'll give it a chance anyway. So let's go ahead and bring on my co-host for today, the lovely and talented Dan Lynch. Dan, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Randal. It's good to be back. It's the first time in the new year, I think, that we've done this together.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's the first time in this decade. I mean, there's a lot of things we could say first in the decade, because we had that decade boundary just a few weeks ago. So awesome. Anyway, yay. And I am in my home in Beaverton once again, and I'm on a hard line, which is nice. So we've got something like 200 down and 150 up. It's really nice when I can get that much. I can't even get that kind of speeds in my Tijuana apartment, even with a hard line. So I think it's more like 30 down, 30 up, but that's still sufficient for doing the show. So it's kind of cool. So today we have sort of a sequel to a show we did a couple years ago. The subject is the Open Mainframe. And what that is, it's a part of the Linux Foundation, one of the committees or sub-projects, I don't know how they name these things, that is specifically looking at making sure that open source software of all sorts of shapes and sizes and varieties can run on mainframes. Now, when I think mainframe, I think back to all those movies in the 60s where you had the racks and racks of computer hardware, but especially, and I don't know, this is such a signature look, the 9-track tapes. Do you remember that, Dan?
Yeah, the reel-to-reels going around in the background in every shot. Yeah, I knew a guy. I won't go on too long. But when I was at university, my professor, my lecturer, he got into computing by his first job was changing tapes on those machines. That's how he got in.
Yeah, and I was a sysadmin for a group at Intel, and we had a 9-track tape, and I would be occasionally asked to mount tapes because they were exchanging stuff between Intel and Carnegie Mellon on the Intel 960 project, the iWarp chip. And so I'd be mounting that. It's fascinating how it works because you can't start and stop those big reels real fast. So they have these vacuum loops that go down and up and kind of take up the slack on both sides. I thought that was pretty cool. Real good design. So anyway, you would think but that's not the mainframe that they're talking about mostly now. I mean, yeah, you can take an existing legacy mainframe and run the things like Linux and stuff on it now, which is really kind of clever. But it turns out that there are new mainframes being created. I think I saw one new offering from IBM that has 70 10-core chips in it. And that's some serious computing power, so, and you could use that for big projects. Yes, even blockchain. We'll mention that a little bit later as well. And other things like that. So it's not just these days, the mainframe doesn't just mean all that old stuff. And I know it's kind of, it's a little weird to talk about things that aren't, microcomputers or even mini computers, I guess, these days, or cloud computing. I mean, you can even rent these things online, so you can actually have your stuff hosted on a mainframe processor somewhere in the cloud. So I think all the major cloud guys provide that. So this should be kind of interesting. John Mertic, who's going to come on in a few minutes to talk to us about this. This is actually his third time on the show. He was on the show 2 years ago to kind of introduce the Open Mainframe stuff. So if you want to go back and listen to that show, you can do that too. And he was also on because he has a lot to do with the Sugar CRM project. He was on in 2012 about that. So, I'm going to ask him a little bit about. Actually, I think Dan, you were going to ask a bit about an update to that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I'll get into that in a bit.
Okay. Well, before we bring him on, though, we do have a very important message, because this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by the leader in address verification, Melissa. Every address is covered from Adelaide, Australia, to Zipacada, Colombia, and everywhere in between. We all know there's nothing good about bad data. It costs money, hurts sales, and decreases customer satisfaction. If bad addresses, duplicate records, and bouncing emails are hurting your business, isn't it time to come clean with Melissa? Delta Faucet, Z1 Motorsports, and Car2Go use Melissa. You should too. Delta Faucet was able to improve their call center processes with global address auto-completion. Melissa was able to reduce the fraudulent e-commerce transactions for Z1 Motorsports by 90%. Melissa provides a full spectrum of data quality protection for your customer data. Verify postal addresses, mobile numbers, and email addresses. Update the addresses of customers that have moved and eliminate duplicate records. Gain additional customer insight into your data with Melissa's analytics. Easily build address verification and customer data validation into your custom application using Melissa's APIs, CRM cloud connectors, and e-commerce plugins, or upload your customer file for a quick data cleanse. Melissa is serious about securely managing your data. They continually undergo independent security audits to reinforce their commitment to data security, privacy, and compliance requirements. SOC 2, HIPAA, and GDPR compliant. Mailers spend about $20 billion annually in undeliverable mail. Don't lose customers or cash. Make every address count. Bad data happens to good companies. That's why 10,000 organizations worldwide trust Melissa to get their customer data clean and accurate. Get started today with 25,000 records cleaned for free. That's a $75 value at melissa.com/twit. That's melissa.com/TWIT, or call 1-800-MELISSA to find out more. And we thank Melissa for their sponsorship of FLOSS Weekly. And now let's go ahead and bring on our guest. John Mertic, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Randal. It's great to be back. I think this is my third trip around the sun on this show, so I'm really excited to participate again. Thank you for the invite.
Awesome. Yes. And where are you speaking to us from?
I am speaking from the lovely Linux Foundation 2nd Ohio office in just outside of Akron, Ohio.
Cool. Well, okay, so we did a show on this already. I presume a lot has changed in 2 years. I mean, that's like forever in the computer industry. So
it is.
Let's first start, though, for people who haven't seen the previous show, just what is Open Mainframe? Why do we need to have mainframes at all, and why do we need to put open source software on them?
Well, mainframes kind of power our world. It's sort of the silent but really important, crucial infrastructure around us. None of us could have got through our days to this point without a mainframe. All of our banking, transportation, backends of healthcare, government, all run on mainframes. I think the person that was with me last time on this, Len Santalucia, who's our board chair, and he's been around the mainframe for 50, 60 years. He told me that, the cloud could go away. We'd all be inconvenienced. We wouldn't be able to do our social media and things like that. But if the mainframe went away, our society would fall into chaos because just so many critical infrastructures that run our society are based on mainframe. So the entire banking, if you use a credit card, it's thanks to a mainframe. If you get on an airplane, it's thanks to a mainframe. So it's really, really, really crucial infrastructure that just frankly, because of the unique nature of it, it just can't be replaced. So that's kind of the background of like why mainframe matters. And I guess your second question of why open source and mainframe matters. Well, we're on a show talking about free and open source. And so we know that that is where our industry is going, where technology is going. And for the mainframe industry, there's a recognition of getting more and more of that successfully running on there helps organizations sort of just tie that might have mainframes, that have other sorts of infrastructure, private cloud, edge computing. They're able to tie and piece all of these things together to build sort of larger solutions out of it. In fact, if you really want to go back, and if you want to go back in time, and if you want to really look at the history of where open source and free software and all of that came from, you can go back to 1955 and the founding of Share, which was really the first ever computer user group. But it was a conference and an event that came together so that mainframe operators, programmers, people like that could actually share source code. Thus the name Share. That's sort of like the predecessor of just this collaboration that we today almost take for granted as open source. So hopefully that helps bring everyone up to speed.
Cool. And the opening of the show, as I was doing the research for this show, I found a slide deck that showed what I thought a mainframe was, a bunch of things with a bunch of 9 tracks, right? And a ugly looking console with a bunch of blinky lights, something from the 60s. But then on the next slide, it showed a modern offering from IBM that I think had 70 10-core processors.
You got it. And the fastest CPU clock cycle processors out there. Absolutely. And it's how the mainframes have been designed since day one, is if you need security, performance, reliability, and scalability, to drop a Spinal Tap reference here, turned up to 11, this is the only hardware that does it.
Cool. Somebody asked, is that something like a Cray, or is this way beyond Cray now?
This is, I guess you could, if you're looking for like a direct thing, you could argue it's sort of, past that. A lot of this is the architecture has been designed just from the ground up to, target that. So like where a Cray might be using a lot of like common components and, common circuitry that's, in the x86 world and things like that. These here are custom designed chips. Think of things like being able to do like hardware encryption as data just hits the disk and it just happens automatically. Think of being able to do millions and millions and millions of transactions per second, but having custom circuitry and processing instructions to make all of that happen. So it's also just a different architecture just under the hood. Which is called S390X, for those of you who might have heard the terminology before. So it's, I guess, if you're looking in the broad scheme of things of, like, is this sort of like in that supercomputer realm? Yes, but from an architectural level, it's a lot different under the hood.
I imagine that different architecture makes it difficult to port things like Linux to there then, right?
It has been. It has the Edian issues. So for those of you that are familiar with Big Edian, Little Edian, so this is different. I always get this wrong. I think this one is the Little Edian versus Big. Somebody in the audience is going to correct me. I really apologize. They'll roast me for that, and for good reason. So you have that as one, is sort of a big difference. And actually that ends up being a lot of the barrier for open source coming over, because things that are written at a C level, for example, or an assembler level, you have to take into account Edian-ness as you're writing it. So that ends up being kind of one of the first barriers in there. But Linux has been on the platform since 1999. It was ported over there by a number of individuals from the community, along with Marist College. And then vendors such as SUSE, which I think was one of the big first ones to jump on the bandwagon, and then later Red Hat and others. Ubuntu jumped on it a few years ago, have been leading sort of the charge there. But yeah, there are differences underneath the hood, but being that it's Linux, it's easily to be exposed. If you log onto a mainframe run Linux, you really wouldn't know the difference than an x86 or a Raspberry Pi or a Power Box or anything like that.
Except that you're burning more electricity.
True. Although it's actually interesting is you see, I've read a number of stories that folks that have huge x86 server farms will actually consolidate it onto a single mainframe and will actually use a lot less electricity than their big x86 server farm was. So yes, a single mainframe uses a lot more than a Raspberry Pi of energy, no doubt of that. But if you have hundreds of x86 boxes, one mainframe is probably nicer to the planet.
Cool. And I understand these modern machines have not only high availability, but also hot swappability.
Yeah, you can swap any piece of a mainframe out as it runs, and it just keeps ticking on. You can actually search along online. There's some real funny pictures. I think during the earthquake in Japan several years ago, there's pictures of mainframes caught in the rubble, tipped over, but somehow still had power to them, and they're still running like nobody's business. There was ones that were still running in the basements of, some of the World Trade Center offices back in 9/11 that just kept kicking on. As long as they had power, they were able to keep running. But yeah, I mean, that's really a lot of the big design principle here is you need a box that can always be on and you can constantly swap pieces in and out of it. And that's really what it's designed to do.
Okay. And let's talk about the Open Mainframe Project. That's, from what I understand, it's sort of a coordination organization more than somebody that's actually producing software. Can you describe more about your role?
Yeah. So, open source has been around the mainframe, since Linux came to the platform in 99. And, one of the challenges that communities often face is they get to a certain level of scale and you end up having a lot of vendor-led initiatives to helping sort of drive and build out the vendor ecosystem. And when that starts to happen, you almost hit like a little bit of a ceiling of where that ecosystem to grow. So a number of these vendors came together and said, we need to have a vendor neutral entity that can be driving forward open source in the mainframe. And initially, a lot of the focus was around Linux. And then 2 years ago, we kind of broadened that out to really all mainframe operating systems, such as ZOS as well. And this is really where the Open Mainframe Project came in to be, as sort of that steward out there in the mainframe world and the open source world that's thinking about how can we ensure open source is sustainable on this architecture. Because this architecture, it's been around for 50 years. It's not going away. It's only actually growing out there quite a bit. And the key part of anything in open source is sustainability. It's an architecture that's, been along longer than I've been alive, and is going to outlive me. And how can we make sure that we're setting things up, we're getting that next generation involved, but more importantly, making sure open source is a citizen on here. So that's kind of like the high level. But on top of that, there's actually a lot of code that's being produced. We've have a number of projects hosted here. One of them, which is a lot of popularity out there, and I think has actually got mainframe back into the pop culture limelight, is a project called Zoe, which is being created to help provide modern interfaces into ZOS, such that, for all these organizations that have applications and different data that's residing on a ZOS system that might have been there for decades. This is a way that you can have a REST API that talks to it, have a CLI that talks to it, build, modern web applications on top of it. And that's just one of the several projects we have going on there. So kind of a combination of just coordination, helping support open source, but also being a vendor neutral home for mainframe specific open source.
That sounds really, really good, John. I mean, actually, as the Linux Foundation as a whole, actually, I suppose this fits in really well with their mission and so on, because that they aim to steward the Linux kernel, and they have different people contributing, many different companies and so on. But they're kind of a bit like Switzerland in a way. They kind of, in some ways, they're trying to manage the kernel, steward the kernel. So this fits in kind of well with that. I'm curious, how popular is Linux on mainframes? What I mean by that is, what's the kind of market share like? Despite my appearance, I'm not actually old enough to really remember mainframes. And I'm wondering these days, what would people run instead of Linux on a mainframe? It seems a bit like a no-brainer to me, but maybe that's just ignorance on my part.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think the latest numbers that I've seen is 90% of the mainframe customers worldwide are running Linux on their mainframe in some degree. Now, they might be running ZOS or some of the other. There's another operating system that always TSMF. I think again I'm gonna have someone flame me in the chat for that. That runs like a lot of airline systems, and for example, you do see people are running multiple things on there, but the trend is, and the biggest uptick right now in new mainframe usage and MIPS usage is on Linux. Matter of fact, IBM sells Linux only mainframes. That's what they run natively is Linux. They don't run the other operating systems on there, which is kind of popular for people who are doing like server consolidation and things like that, or getting to the point where they have applications that just have high transactional workloads that you need that sort of hardware to do on it. And I think the latest Z15 even had a lot of native hooks into things like Kubernetes, so that for people that are kind of like trying to balance applications across the board. So you might be someone like a DevOps role that's thinking, okay, I have this application, it has a lot of different tiers to it. I have one part of it that needs high transactional. They can easily float that off onto a mainframe and focus that on there. So it's a growing population. It's the growing segment in there. Probably still the most of the MIPS usage is, on ZOS, but Linux is probably where all the growth currently is on the platform.
Yeah, it makes sense to me, but then again, I'm not running a massive multinational corporation or something that needs this. But it seems pretty obvious to me that you would want to. Linux is a very active platform. Obviously, the kernel's continuously developed. You've got all the expertise there, and it's been around. Okay, compared to the mainframes, Linux is still fairly young. But we're looking at 25 years or whatever it is now, nearly 30 odd years of the Linux kernel existing. So it's no spring chicken itself. In what I mean is it's well established. And it's got all of that kind of expertise and stuff, and it's very popular. What kind of you've mentioned some of the applications that people would run on this. I'm assuming that for most applications that say a small group, a small enterprise or something like that would want to run, this is probably going to be overkill. You're really talking about, if I'm looking for something to run my accounts system for my company that employs 50 people and then, maybe some websites and stuff as well, is a mainframe going to be too much for me? You're looking at really enterprise, massive level customers?
Yeah, enterprise level, and then I think transactional size is also sort of a key thing there. So, if you're this is why like a lot of the airline booking systems in the back end are running mainframes, because you have that volume of transactions that's going through, and you need to have results coming back instantaneously. And even if you horizontally scale out a cloud infrastructure, you can't match the transactional speed that a mainframe can provide. So so it's a combination, I think, of enterprise breadth, but also the transactional piece, I think, is a really, really crucial part. And then I'd add the third angle is on the security side of things. If you need a box that has like hardware level encryption on there, this is the one that has it. I think, the mainframe folks told that a mainframe hasn't been hacked. Because it has that level of heavy encryption there. The nice thing is if you're running Linux on that, you're natively taking advantage of that. That's all sort of transparent to you, from a user land perspective. So it's certainly not the stuff that it's not the box you're going to buy if you're running a small business, unless your small business is, 1 million transactions a second, then maybe. But it is the box if you're a large enterprise, you're having that 1 million transactions, or if you're also just looking at consolidation. Like if you have a couple hundred x86 boxes, there's a ton of stories out there around the cost savings of just dropping a mainframe in there, just from a total cost of ownership perspective, hardware, software, and just frankly power and data space and data center space, which is a growing problem in a lot of organizations. That makes a lot of sense. Are they very popular in the stock exchange, for example? Because I know their transactional speed obviously is massive. Because I listened to a fascinating podcast, which I can't remember the name of now. Unfortunately, sorry people, but about the way the systems that do the automated trading in stock exchanges, they have to be given the same, no matter how far physically away they are from the
from Wall Street, from the Stock Exchange building, they have to be given the same amount of like network cable. Even if they're right next to it, they have to have a big dumper cable next to them. And if they're the furthest away, then obviously a bit less, because a millisecond in that world is millions of dollars or potentially. So I'm assuming mainframes would be big there.
Finance, insurance, transportation, healthcare, government, all of those areas where the volume of transactions is high, the transactional speed needing computed is extremely high. Those are all native places. I'm sure you probably heard a podcast or two around blockchain, recently. Blockchain and Hyperledger Fabric is a very popular application we're seeing running on mainframes, for example, for exactly that, that some reason you're stating there. You just, you need to have, milliseconds is millions of dollars. And this is the hardware you trust it to if that's what's critically important to you.
I remember when I was going to New York all the time. I haven't been in New York except twice in the last 15 years. It's sort of 9/11 was sort of my last real day there. The week before 9/11. Anyway, I remember I had a buddy that was doing arbitrage, and he said his computers needed to be like in the building next door to the core Wall Street, because any further and the arbitrage would just fall apart. So I also said, I read the book Random Walk on Wall Street, and it tries to disprove that you can even do what you're doing. And he says, no, you can't do what I'm doing because I've already done it. I've already taken the gap out. So by the time you see the numbers, it's too late. I've already taken that gap. And I went, that's interesting. But he was making billions of dollars for his clients. It was really amazing. It was really fun to hear him tell stories about that. Anyway, that's way off topic now. But
that's okay.
Is this mostly on-prem or in the cloud, or are people even doing this in the cloud?
So you do have vendors that are in the space that are doing sort of like a co-location model. So, I mean, if you're thinking of like cloud, like AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, right, things like that, I don't think they're quite there yet. I think there is paths that they're going there. I think IBM is looking at potential offerings in that space. And again, I'm not IBM, so I can't disclose of where they're going with that. But I do know that there are also vendors and service partners out there that are doing co-location for customers as well, and management for them. Historically, a lot of this was on-prem or in folks' data centers.
Right. Okay, cool. And as I was flipping through the slide deck earlier today, no, I guess it was yesterday, researching for this, one of the slide decks I found, I flipped past a page and I went, oh my God, my audience is going to love this. Blockchain.
Mm-hmm.
Now, blockchain is a lot more than Bitcoin. Blockchain is also about all these new ways of having public ledgers for all sorts of different things. So is that as a mainframe sort of designed for blockchain? Is it better for that?
If you're looking in the context of transactional speed, that's where mainframe fits in there perfectly. I think there's a couple interesting use cases out there. One I know off the top of my head is an organization called Plastic Bank, which is focused on managing sort of the plastic waste that's flowing in oceans worldwide. And one of the things that they're trying to do is help kind of trace exactly where a lot of this is, but also have ways that people can like return some of this plastic back and being able to track a lot of that. They're using, Hyperledger and, distributed blockchain in the back end to manage a lot of that and to manage all the different nodes. And the whole back end of that is a mainframe. If again, it kind of comes down to like, if the qualification for your application is I need, security, performance, scalability, and availability all turned up to an 11, all at the same time, all those knobs turned all at once up to an 11. This is the platform. And for many people who are running blockchains or Hyperledger, that does align with there very nicely.
Cool. And how can I get involved? I don't have access to a mainframe anywhere. Is there a way I can borrow time on somebody else's?
Yeah. So if you're specifically wanting to try Linux out on a mainframe, there's a service which is ran by IBM and Marist College called the Linux One Community Cloud. You can sign up on a 120-day free account, and you can just keep renewing it as well afterwards, where you get straight access to SUSE, Red Hat, Ubuntu, right on a mainframe. And you can sign up, you can, try your applications on it. You're just dropped right into the command line and go with it. So that's a great way if you just want to get started, like just, play on it, see what it's all about, all of that. If you're an open source project and you happen to be listening to this podcast and you're thinking, wow, I'd like to see if the project that I support runs on this. We actually have a program called the Supported Projects Program, which does both a combination of get access to hardware like that. And then we also have some other universities and other folks that provide hardware that we're also able to leverage there. But we're also helping to connect you with mainframe experts that can answer sort of your questions of, wow, my thing doesn't run on here. Why is that? And they can look at it and say, oh, well, this is because of X, Y, and Z. And then even as a project, we're able to help, promote the fact that, hey, this new project runs on a mainframe. Come check it out. So there's a lot of different angles there. If you want to just get started, Linux One Community Cloud. If you're wanting to, get your open source project running on there, we have our Supported Projects program to help get that going. And I believe there's also a similar program there for people wanting to play with Zoe on ZOS. There's an IBM trial there as well that you can check out.
Now, is this an emulation or is this an actual piece of real hardware? And I mean, does it run at full speed? You're on the real deal. You're right on bare metal there. You're right there in an LPAR, and this is the real thing. So I could upload my Bitcoin miner.
You're going to make some people very unhappy at Marist. They're going to check you on that one.
Just kidding.
But that's between you and them.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I think we've well established, without anybody needing to watch the show 2 years ago, what this is all about. So tell me now what the differences are. It's been 2 years. What's happened?
So the big thing is the recognition that there's just a lot of open source even just outside of the Linux side. So the project was very much focused on the Linux side of things, and we started to see sort of the ZOS community as it's looking to sort of modernize itself. Wanted to also have an opportunity. They were looking at also building open source as well. And so a project came along, and it was initially contributed by IBM, Broadcom, but then at that point, this was prior to the merger, so they were under the CA brand, and a software company called Rocket Software, which is based in the Boston, Massachusetts area. And they had a number of components that they were independently sort of building to sort of tackle this modernization problem. Because, if anybody in the audience has classically ever been a mainframe programmer, if I use the term 3270 terminal or green screen, you'll know what I'm talking about. And you'll probably also be able to sort of know the challenge of integrating with a system like that. And so they came up with, and they all had developed some different technologies, but they all sort of tied together. So IBM was bringing to the table a series of REST APIs that could run on the ZOS instance, but would expose out the different parts of applications and data on the mainframe. The folks from Rocket had brought forward the concept of building on that and building a web desktop environment. So if you're wanting to build, a React application or something like that maybe is tying together mainframe data along with other line of business or other applications, you could just do that and mix it right up there in the web browser. And the folks from CA were looking at is, hey, if you wanted to tie in the mainframe application development cycle, into the rest of your DevOps environment, being able to have a CLI that you could do programming against and sort of put that as a part of that bigger chain was a real crucial thing. So they all came together and said, this is probably a really big thing for this industry if we can transform it, because that is sort of where all the technology is going, and be able to help unify these shops that already have a legion of developers that know REST APIs, no web desktop, web API components, graphical components, no CLIs, they can leverage a lot of those skills across, and they can actually, these customers can build some really cool stuff, and these users can build some really cool stuff. So they came together, they came all to the Open Mainframe Project and said, hey, can we want to have this project, we want to have it ran neutrally here because we want to also use this as an opportunity to get more organizations involved. We just don't want us three doing all of this. We want more feedback from the community. We want more of the mainframe community coming to us. So 2 years ago, they came together. We put the project and concept together. We worked with them, and we launched it, in the summer of 2018. And the project's called Zoe. And it's really kind of changed a little bit. It's opened up a lot more possibilities of, people really interested in the project. It's brought through some new open source projects to us as well. There's one called Phalong, which is focused on connecting, modern cloud stacks like OpenStack back to the ZVM hypervisor, which is the native hypervisors used on mainframes. Projects focused on, Jenkins, projects focused on, ZOS workflows, which is a configuration tool that's kind of being driven through, kind of the modern part of mainframes. And even more collaboration tools on, Rocket had been porting a ton of open source over to ZOS, and it wanted to see, hey, how can we get more of a community effort around this? Because we don't want to, we think there's some really talented people that can help bring some more expertise to it. So Zoe was a real big milestone and a really big sort of, I don't want to say turning point, but I think it really opened things up for the project. And with that, more interesting innovation, more projects started to come in. I think when Zoe came in, we had 2 projects hosted at that time, and now we're around 9. So things are really, really starting to take off that way. And with it, it's also given us an ability to have a greater view at the long term of sort of the ecosystem and looking at things like, bringing in that next generation, thinking of driving more diversity within the mainframe community. Tech isn't a great place for diversity in general. Mainframing is kind of shockingly slightly worse. And so we want to help make sure we can get that next generation and a more diverse generation in there. And we sponsored a number of events along those fronts. And then we're really excited. We're actually having an event next September in New York and Manhattan, where we're trying just to bring together not just the open source that's related to the Open Mainframe Project, but just open source on mainframe in general, called the Open Mainframe Summit, and really just trying to cultivate that larger community, because a lot of it, even before the project was out there, but it just never had a really great place to all plug together. So it's we've done a couple things since the last time we talked, Randal.
It sounds like you've been pretty busy. Yeah, it sounds like you've been pretty busy. There's a couple of quick things I wanted to ask about. So you mentioned about connecting to people and plugging into people and stuff, and that this kind of relates. I noticed on the website it mentions the Open Mainframe mentorship. It's my accent, so mentorship. I should say it more clearly. Yep. What is that? And if I wanted to apply for it, if I was listening to this, and I thought I'd love to learn more about mainframes, I need a mentor. What is that, and how do I get involved?
So it was actually one of the big things of where the project was really founded of, how can we take the talent that already exists in the mainframe world and use them to help enable and mentor sort of the next generation of people coming up. And so we run an annual funded mentorship program where we have a number of organizations, open source projects that come to us and say, hey, we're looking to do this work. We're looking to maybe, get our project ported over to the mainframe. We're looking to add this feature functionality to this existing mainframe open source project. And they come to us with the project ideas, along with a mentor that's willing to, work with somebody. And then if you're a student out there, you can apply for this program and you work with this mentor over the summer. It's a paid mentorship, so there's an opportunity to make some money over the summer. But also the nice thing is at the end of it, we pay the full travel to bring every single one of the mentees to an industry conference. I think in the past we've brought them to Share. The last couple of years we've brought them to Open Source Summit. We give them their own session where they can present all the work they've done. And as an opportunity, they get introduced to, employers, people that are looking to hire students. So it's a really great way to connect a lot of these students with career paths in mainframe, because mainframe tends to be one of the higher paying out of college, university paths out there. For somebody who's, their first year, just immediately a new hire, mainframe jobs tend to pay the highest. But it's oftentimes the challenge is just connecting, folks together. So a lot of the, people who've graduated from that program have worked for companies like ADP, Viacom Infinity, IBM, SUSE, and others, and they're still out there hacking. We have one student that ported Alpine Linux, who's one of our first mentees. He ported Alpine Linux to the mainframe, and he's now like one of the lead maintainers for that project. Got to go to grad school at Marist with that, and now works at IBM. So, so if you're interested, you can go. Yeah, you saw it on the website, openmainframeproject.org /project/mentorship program. The applications are accepted through the end of February. So go ahead and apply there. If the timing or whatever doesn't work out for the summer mentorship, if you're like a university that's looking at like self-study or class project or capstone programs, a lot of those projects are also available for you to work in that context as well. So if you want to have a group of people in your class working on it, and you have a university professor that's willing to, go to sponsor and help with the effort, we're able to also help make the connections there too.
Well, we're almost out of time. The time flies like an arrow when you are having fun. Time flies when you're having fun. It does. Something like that. There we go. And the network has hard deadlines on a lot of on taping every show actually. So keeping that in mind, because I know you're very fluent. You're very your answers are long and wonderful.
You're saying I talk quite a bit, aren't you, Randal?
I'm trying to say that nicely. Yes. Very informative answers. So I'll tell you what. We got. Is there anything we didn't cover? We covered quite a few things. Is there anything we didn't cover that you want to make sure our audience is aware before they go? Eloquent. That's the answer to the question.
Yeah. Well played. No, I think we hit on the high things. Definitely. I think everyone has the links. Check out the website. I think the big things, and Dan called out the mentorship program, which is fabulous. If you're a student out there, go check that out. Like I said, the two other really big things we talked about, just kind of the push we have and the work we're trying to do around diversity, not only at tech, especially women in tech, but also within the mainframe sphere. We sponsor a lot of events, especially at Share, which is still a conference 50, 60 some years running on, which is really exciting. And then, like I said, we're having our first ever conference ourselves this September. And if you check out our website, or you can just Google Open Mainframe Summit, it comes right up. You can find it there as well. And if you're especially in the New York City area, great place to come. Or if you like to visit New York City, come spend a couple days with us and learn about open source and mainframe.
Cool. And my two final questions I have to ask, or my audience gets mad at me. What's your favorite text editor?
Well, I should always answer Emacs to that question, right?
You should. Well, you should make it true. Make it true.
I have used Emacs a lot. I don't use as much text editor as I used. So I grew up a developer, and I did use a mixture of things, and Emacs was in my rotation. I don't know exactly what I use the most these days. I've used Atom a lot, but it's kind of, I don't want to be mean to people, but it's not exactly the most performant application on my computer. Sure. But Emacs, just works everywhere, right?
Yep. Yeah. Have you played with VS Code yet?
I've seen people playing with it. I've been tempted to look at it, but it's probably the same with Emacs. Like once you have the muscle memory of how everything works, it's really hard to change.
Right. Well,
maybe I will have to try it. If it's a recommendation for Randal, I will give it a look.
Well, if you have Emacs muscle memory, there's an Emacs key binding extension. So I'm using it in Emacs mode.
Okay. And
it works. It's just automatic. My hands are going right to the right places and everything. It's really awesome. So check that out. And what's your favorite scripting language?
So I grew up a PHPer. I don't do as much PHP anymore. I used to be really involved in the community, and I've kind of grown out of that. I use a mixture of things. I've used a lot of Python lately. I still even do a lot of shell scripts for silly things, just stitching things together really quickly. So it's probably somewhere between both of those.
Yeah, cool. Hey, John, you'll have to come back again in maybe a couple of years when you have more time.
Absolutely. Hey, I am always up for coming anytime, or if you ever need, someone else to sit in other than Dan or whoever else, I'm always happy to join in.
Ironically, the show 2 years ago started a half hour late as well. And so the whole show was only a half hour.
That's okay. That's okay.
You
know what? It's great time with you no matter what.
Okay. All right. We got to get rid of here. That was John Mertic talking to us about Open Mainframe and a bunch of other things. What do you think there, Dan?
Yeah, I thought it was great. Really, really interesting. And yeah, I can see. I mean, I suppose it's difficult for because I don't work in an enterprise or anything like that. It's harder for me to. That's why I was asking the questions about am I going to use this for my small company or whatever? Which obviously you're probably not. But I can see how in certainly mission critical or safety critical systems, all those kind of like finance that John was talking about, all those things, you really need that kind of power. And actually, it's taught me. At first I thought, why would I use a mainframe instead of something like AWS or, an open source solution instead, or a cloud type thing. But actually, he's convinced me there. It makes a lot of sense.
Cool. Yeah, cool. Like I said, we're up against a hard deadline, so I want to get through the final parts of the show. So I don't really have anything to add to what you just said, so I think I'll just stop there. Upcoming next week is Weaviate, an open source knowledge graph. Weaviate is a GraphQL RESTful API-based knowledge graph with a built-in semantic model called the contextionary. Oh boy, have your buzzword bingo cards out next week. Then I'm going to bring on a buddy of mine who I've been talking with a lot offline, Hillel Koren, who has a podcast on different Flutter things. So he's been doing stuff. He's pretty big in the Flutter community. He also runs the It's All Widgets website, and he also has a podcast. I think the podcast's called It's All Widgets because in Flutter app, it's all like that. And he was first on my show, though, not for Flutter, because this was even before Flutter existed, but for Invoice Ninja, which is a really amazing free to use, actually. I don't know how he makes any money at it. Must bank it up in volume. Way of doing invoicing. So really cool. It has online forums. You can send people the invoices. They can pay directly through it, directly to PayPal, things like that. Really, really cool. But that's all open source, and he's going to talk a little bit about what's been happening with that in the last few years. Hydra was after that. Sorry for my throat there. Hydra is a framework for elegantly configuring complex applications. Cool. Deep Code alerts you about critical vulnerabilities you need to solve in your code. Don't let security bugs go to production. Save time finding and fixing them. And then I don't have a description for this. I'll just remember what he told me about it. Linux Bierwanderung, which I think he said translates to something like basically Linux and beer wandering around. It's basically like a meetup, but they're going from pub to pub. So it's like a pub crawl where they're talking about Linux all the way through. That is pretty crazy. So that'll be fun. NetData. It's a distributed real-time performance and health monitoring for systems and applications. It's a highly optimized monitoring agent you install on all your systems and containers. XS Code turns your open source project into a steady revenue stream. Boy, if I could do that, I would not have to work for a day job. I'm really curious about how they're doing that. And Agonies, that you host, run, and scale dedicated game servers on Kubernetes. So that's going to be fun. We're still booking shows all the time. I've got a few out in the queue right now. Sorry, trying to take care of my throat here. Go to twit.tv/floss. That's the homepage for this show to see this show and all the previous ones. And also go to the big spreadsheet. Follow the link that says who's upcoming on the show. If there's a guest you want on the show that isn't on that list, please have their community coordinator or project leader or whatever, email me, merlin@stonehenge.com. My email address is on the very center of that page. I had somebody write me and said, I had to look everywhere to get your email address. You say it so fast in the show. And I said, well, it's right there in the middle of the page you were looking at. And he goes, oh, if there'd been a snake, it would have bit me. And I said, yep, that's right. That's why I put that right there. Okay. And we have a live stream at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time on Wednesdays. We took a couple of questions in there, I think. At live.twit.tv is where we host live. You can follow us at FLOSS Weekly on Twitter. You can follow me at Merlin on Twitter, MERLYN. And you can also join us at the forum twit.community. So that's in twit.community. There's a bunch of areas, a bunch of sectors. I don't know what they call them, channels. And FLOSS Weekly is one of them. The moment after a show gets posted, or pretty fast, a new topic is created under that thread, so you can see and discuss about this very show, for example, once that gets posted there. We also just want to the Home Office wants me to say it's time for Twit's annual audience survey, and we want to hear from you. It takes only 5 minutes. Please visit twit.to/survey20, survey20, and let us know what you think. There's no sign-up form, and we don't track you. Your feedback helps us make Twit even better. And thank you for your continued support. So I think that's about all I've got. Dan, what do you got?
Yeah, I won't. Well, seeing as we're up against a quick deadline, I'll just say come along and see me at danlynch.org, which is my website. You can find the various podcasts and stuff that I'm doing. Going to do a bit more music in future. Follow me on Twitter if you want to see all about that, at MethodDan. And with that, I think, I won't take up too much time. Great, Dan. That's thanks for being the co-host for this show. And we make a good team. I always like it when I can do good handoffs and when we make suggestions to each other. That's always kind of fun. All right. Well, that's it. We're out of time. We're really, really out of time. We'll see you all again next week on FLOSS Weekly.